You're 26. You've been dealing for 4 years, and someone above you has decided you're ready. It doesn't come as a dramatic announcement. A floor supervisor pulls you aside after a Tuesday graveyard shift and says the high-limit room is looking for somebody with clean mechanics and a steady temperament. He says your name came up. He asks if you're interested. You say yes before he finishes the sentence. You don't fully understand what you're agreeing to. You understand the surface version. Better tips, quieter room, fewer players, higher stakes. What you don't understand yet is that the stakes are not just financial, they are atmospheric. The high-limit room operates at a different pressure than the main floor, and that pressure will change how you do everything, including how you hold yourself, how you read people, and eventually how you think about money in ways that take years to notice. But that's later. Right now you say yes, and you spend the next 2 weeks on a different kind of probationary period, being observed by the room manager, running shorter sessions on lower traffic tables, being evaluated on composure as much as mechanics. At the end of those 2 weeks, you are assigned a regular rotation in the high-limit pit. You are 26, and you are about to learn that the game you've been dealing is the same game, and an entirely different one. This room is smaller than you expected. That's the first thing you notice on your first real shift. The main casino floor operates on volume. Dozens of tables, hundreds of players, constant noise cycling through layers of itself until it becomes its own kind of silence you stop hearing. The high-limit room doesn't work that way. It's quieter in a way that feels intentional, designed, like the acoustic engineering of the space was deliberate. Fewer tables, each with more space between them. The lighting is different, warmer and lower. There are no slot machines. There's a bar, usually staffed, and leather seating around the perimeter for guests who aren't playing. The carpet is thicker. None of that is incidental. Every design choice in a high-limit room is communicating the same thing. Your money is significant here, and we have organized the environment to reflect that significance back at you. It is a mirror made of architecture. The tables themselves look the same as main floor tables. Same green felt, same chip trays, same discard rack. But the placard at the end shows a minimum bet that would have seemed surreal to you 4 years ago. $500. That number sitting on a small plastic sign like it's routine. Because here it is. You stand at your table for the first time and you feel the weight of that number, even though you've been around money in casino, form long enough to know better. You know chips are not money in the emotional sense. You learnt that in the first month. But the first time you deal a hand where a single bet is worth more than your rent, the knowing and the feeling are briefly misaligned. They realign within a week. This is how adaptation works here. The table minimum is $500. The maximum, depending on the night and the player and what the shift manager has approved, can reach $25,000 per hand. On special request, with the right approval chain, it can go higher. You have been told this matter-of-factly, the same way someone might explain a filing system. When you deal, the math that used to involve tens and hundreds now involves thousands with the same ease. A losing hand at your table produces a chip pull that would have looked like a significant bet downstairs. Here it registers as routine. That transition takes longer than you expect, not the recognition that the numbers are large, but the recalibration of your nervous system to stop producing a signal when you see them. The house edge at your table, with the rules this room runs, it's at roughly 0.25% for players using correct strategy. The room offers 3-2 payouts on blackjack. Dealer stands on soft 17, surrender is available, re-splitting aces is permitted. These are better rules than most of the main floor. This is not generosity, it is calibration. The players who sit at your table know the difference, and the casino knows the players know. Giving them favourable conditions is part of the value proposition that keeps them in the room. The players are the thing no one fully prepares you for. On the main floor, you dealt to tourists, to people celebrating birthdays, to regulars who came because they liked the social rhythm of a table. You dealt to people who played because they were on vacation, and playing was the thing you did. Some of them knew basic strategy. Most didn't, and it didn't matter to them that they didn't. The high-limit room is different in composition, though not uniformly. There are broadly 3 types of people you learn to recognize within a few hands of seeing them sit down. The first type is the professional. Not professional in the sense of making a living from gambling, though some of them are attempting that. Professional in the sense of their relationship to the game being technical. They've studied. They know the expected value of every decision. They're not here for the atmosphere. They're here to execute a strategy across a large enough sample to give the math room to express itself. These players are calm, quiet, and methodical. They're also the players who generate the least emotional friction at your table. The second type is the wealthy recreational player. Usually business owners, executives, people for whom $500 is genuinely not a significant unit of money. They're not playing to win in any analytical sense. They're playing because sitting in a nice room with expensive chips in front of them is an experience they enjoy and can afford. They tip generously when they're up. They're good company when things are going well. When things go wrong, they go wrong differently. The third type is harder to categorize. They have money, enough to sit at your table, sometimes significantly more than enough, but that their relationship to that money while they're in your presence is not comfortable. The bets they place represent something they can feel. You can see it. The professional doesn't flinch at a losing hand. This type does. Briefly, quietly, in a way they've learned to manage, but the management is visible. The management is the tell. On the main floor, your shuffle was clean and your pitch was consistent, and that was sufficient. In the high-limit room, the mechanics need to be invisible. What that means in practice is that when you're dealing to a player who has put $20,000 in play across multiple hands, your execution cannot carry any trace of the weight of that number. Your pitch has to arrive at the same angle and with the same velocity as it would if the bet were $10. Your cut card placement, your burn card execution, your handling of the discard rack, all of it has to move with the ease of someone who finds none of this unusual, because in this room, none of it should be. The players at this level read everything. Not because they're looking for information about you specifically, but because people who operate at high stakes in any context develop situational awareness as a survival tool. They notice variations. They notice if your rhythm changes when a large bet is placed. They notice if you glance toward the pit boss at an unusual moment. They notice, in other words, if the dealer is not fully neutral, and a dealer who is not fully neutral introduces friction into a room that has been designed to have none. Your shuffle at this level is not just a shuffle. It's a performance of competence and calm. Every time you run through the procedure, cutting the decks, interleaving, boxing, you are communicating to every person at the table. This is ordinary. This is routine. We have done this 10,000 times and we will do it 10,000 more. And none of it means anything beyond the mechanics. The tells at this level are subtler than on the main floor. On the main floor, a player in distress was usually legible. The jaw shift, the hand that went to the wallet, the way the body angled away from the table, as if the distance between the person and the chips was itself a form of damage control. Those tells were clear enough that you learned to read them almost passively. In the high-limit room, the players have more experience managing their presentation. The professional has no tells related to loss, because loss is an expected part of the statistical distribution they're working within. The wealthy recreational player has developed social tools for loss absorption. A small exhale, a shrug executed at exactly the right volume to communicate, "This doesn't bother me," without over-communicating it. The slight recalibration of posture that says the loss registered but was filed appropriately. What you actually watch for is the bet that changes. A player who has been placing consistent bets across 20 or 30 hands and then, on a specific hand, increases significantly. You watch for the calculation behind that increase. Is it strategic? Is it impulsive? The professional's bet increase follows a logic you can sometimes reverse engineer if you watch long enough. The recreational player's increase is emotional. Something shifted, a hot feeling about the next hand, a desire to recover ground, and the bet reflects it before the conscious mind has fully authorized it. You also watch the rhythm of the buy-in. A player who sits down and buys $10,000 in chips and plays steadily is one thing. A player who sits down and buys 5,000, then another 5,000 40 minutes later, then reaches for their phone is something else. The phone reach in a high-limit room is rarely social. You learn what it usually means. There is a night that stays with you across the years of working this room. A player you've dealt to before, a software executive in his early 50s who plays with the disciplined flatness of someone who has thought about bankroll management. He runs hot for about 90 minutes. He wins steadily, not dramatically. Just the even accumulation that happens when the cards fall correctly for long enough. The chips build up in front of him, and then the room shifts. It's not a visible shift, it's a felt one. The players at the adjacent table glance over more frequently. The floor manager drifts closer. A cocktail server makes a second pass without anyone signaling for one. The host, who had been at the bar end of the room, moves nearer without appearing to move nearer. You've seen this happen before. A winning streak in a high-limit room generates its own gravity. The player is up roughly $80,000. At some tables in this room, that number would represent a catastrophic swing for the house. Here it's significant enough to require attention, but not unusual enough to stop the game. What you feel in this moment is not rooting for one outcome or another. You feel something closer to neutral interest in the mathematics of the situation. He's been running above expectation. The cards don't have memory. The next hand's probability is identical to every prior hand's probability. The hot feeling in the room is human. The deck doesn't share it. He plays two more shoes. He ends his session up roughly 62,000. He tips well. He leaves without ceremony. The room exhales. The floor manager drifts back to where he started. The cocktail server returns to her station. You shuffle the decks. There is an economy inside the high-limit room that runs in parallel to the game itself. You deal the cards. Something else deals the player. Every significant player who sits at your table has a number. The casino calls it theoretical loss, or Theo. It's calculated from the average bet size, the number of hands played per hour, and the house edge on the game. The formula produces a figure representing what the house statistically expects to take from that player over time. That number determines what the player receives from the casino in return. For players at your table, betting $500 to $5,000 per hand across hours of play, the theoretical loss figure can reach tens of thousands of dollars per visit. A portion of that figure, typically between 25 and 40%, depending on the casino's comp rate, comes back to the player as complimentary services. Suite upgrades, private jet transfers, restaurant reservations at hours when no one else can get a table. A host available by text at 2 a.m. who will solve whatever problem the player has before the problem becomes a reason to leave. You are not directly part of this system. Your job is the cards and the chips and the surface of the experience. But you work inside it, and you understand it, which means you understand something about each player who sits at your table that they may not have consciously articulated. The casino knows exactly what they're worth. The precision of that knowledge is, in a very specific way, the reason the room looks the way it does. There is a night in your third year in the high-limit room that you do not discuss with anyone afterward. A man you've seen perhaps 6 or 7 times over the years, a regular without being a regular, someone who comes in concentrated runs of visits. He sits down on a Friday night and buys $40,000 in chips. This is not unusual for him. He starts playing. The cards are not cooperating. Within 90 minutes, the 40,000 is gone. He buys another 30,000 without breaking his expression or changing the pace of his speech. You're dealing, exchanging a brief word when he makes a comment, maintaining the professional warmth that the room requires. The next 30,000 goes in about an hour. He buys 20,000 more. You watch the chips diminish with the pacing of someone watching rain. Steady, inevitable, not shocking but relentless. He loses that too. He sits for a moment after the last chip is collected. He makes a small sound that is not quite a word, something internal that escaped briefly. Then he signals the host, has a brief conversation you cannot hear, and leaves. $90,000. In under 4 hours, you shuffle the decks. A new player sits down. You deal the first hand. You think about it on the drive home. Not with guilt, not exactly. You were dealing blackjack with fair rules and correct procedures. The math of the situation is not something you created. But the image of that small sound, the thing that escaped before he composed himself, follows you longer than images from this room usually do. What you come to understand gradually over the years is that the high-limit room is not harder on you emotionally because the losses are larger. It's harder because the losses are quieter. On the main floor, distress was legible. Here it's managed, contained, expressed through pauses and composed expressions and well-practiced exits. The professionalism of the loss conceals it in a way that makes it more present, not less. You see the effort being expended to hide something, and the effort itself tells you what's being hidden. Research on casino dealers confirms what your body knew before your mind caught up with it. The occupational demands of the job contribute to long-standing emotional exhaustion in ways that accumulate rather than spike. The specific strain of managing your own emotional expression while observing others manage theirs is a form of labor. The work requires even when you not conscious of performing it. In year 3, in the high-limit room, you start to notice the transfer. The professional distance you apply at the table no longer fully stays at the table. You're at dinner with your partner, and they're telling you about something that happened at work, something genuinely difficult, and you catch yourself responding from the part of you that runs the high-limit room. Present, attentive, appropriate, but not fully in the room in the way the moment is asking for. You register this. You don't know what to do with it immediately. You think about an older dealer you used to work with on the main floor who told you once that the job doesn't take from you all at once. It takes from you in small amounts during every shift, and you don't notice the deficit until you try to spend something you don't have anymore. You thought he was being dramatic. You think about this more now. A player asks you something one evening that you have been asked in various forms. Add to basket. Before, but this version lands differently. She's a woman in her mid-40s, down a moderate amount, playing thoughtfully. She's been at your table for about an hour. She looks at you between shuffles and asks, genuinely and without challenge, does this ever get heavy? not the specific losses of specific players. Does the accumulation of it, the whole architecture of the room, the system you work inside, does it ever feel like weight? You give a version of the standard answer. You talk about legal entertainment. You talk about personal choice. You talk about the rules being fair and the game being transparent. She nods. She's not challenging you. She says she's asking because you seem like someone who thinks about it. And she's right, though you don't say so. You think about it. You deal the next hand. She loses. She plays 2 more shoes and leaves up slightly. She tips you $50, which is not unusual at this table, but registers differently tonight. The question stays, not because you don't have answers, but because the answers feel, for the first time in a while, slightly smaller than the question. You're 33 now. You left the high-limit room 2 years ago. Left the casino the year after that. The skills translated cleanly into a different kind of operations management, one that also requires reading rooms and maintaining composure across long shifts and making people feel taken care of in environments designed to produce that feeling. What you carry from the high-limit room is not regret, or not exactly. It's more like an education in a specific kind of observation. You learn to see people at precise moments of decision, when the gap between what they want and what they've decided to risk is at its smallest. You saw what composure costs when it has to be maintained for hours at a time. You saw the economy of attention, so how the casino knows the value of every person in the room, while most of those people don't know they're being measured. You hope some of the players you dealt to are okay. You think about the man and that small sound he made before he composed himself. You think about the woman who asked you whether it gets heavy. You think she was asking partly about herself. You know statistically that some of them aren't okay. That's the part that doesn't have a table minimum or a maximum. That's the part that stays with you. If this stayed with you, subscribe. It helps us make more.